So, I've had a couple people ask me on my opinion of some of this stuff because Brian is somebody that I've shared games with for probably somewhere in the ballpark of 15 years, maybe a little bit longer. We started Work to Game together a little over 6 years ago. But, you know, as it's come time for him to leave Final Fantasy XIV, as that chapter of his life kind of closes, and he wraps up the remaining controller guides and kind of the commitments he's made to the community, and bows out for, you know, a while or forever. So some people have come in and said, can you talk about some of these points? Because they found that they disagreed with Brian. And I think it's one of the things people have always liked about Work to Game. Like, Work to Game was always meant to be a collaborative venture where our opinions can come together and we bounce off each other. And when we believe that something is really better for gaming as a whole, we can reiterate on each other and we can back each other up and we both stand for that. But on things where it's a lot more just an opinion in our minds and it's not about something like getting toxicity out of games, or that more games is better, or that more content creators is better, even if they're ones we disagree with. When you get to things like how party groups should work, or how loot should work, we fundamentally disagree at a base level.
I don't like World of Warcraft. I haven't enjoyed WoW, and I didn't like what Final Fantasy XIV copied from WoW. 14 being another WoW clone, according to Yoshi P's words.
I don't think that Yoshi P said it was going to be a WoW clone. I think he said we needed to look at why 1.0 failed and what the successful games of the time were doing, namely World of Warcraft. And so out of the gate, it came out learning a lot of what World of Warcraft did well. But to continue to call it a WoW clone today, even though I continually say they have a lot in common, you're saying that anything that mimics the qualities of World of Warcraft, which mimics the qualities of the games that came before it, is a WoW clone. So you're starting to use the word clone to represent an entire category of games. And that's not really fair. I think clones, in my mind, are people that are trying to do like a reskin. So we're going to take like Disney branding and we're going to release it over an existing game with all the same mechanics in all the same ways to get our piece of the money for people that want to give it to somebody for a different set of cosmetics or underneath a different publisher's name. There are true clones out there, and they don't move gaming in any meaningful direction. They don't extend the boundaries, right? They don't push out what's capable. They don't double down on existing qualities in ways that move them to quality or quantity levels we've never seen before. Final Fantasy XIV is a narrative-based MMO. That is, by its very nature, a fundamental difference with how World of Warcraft came out of being a world in which to explore an RTS. I can already see why people wanted me to talk about this. I've already watched her post on this. So this is mostly me talking about Brian. It ended up last time me just focusing on how great Guild Wars is, because it's a lot of what they describe. But I do think there's some word choice here. And so there's already just going to be a difference in the way Brian and I communicate.
And beyond just that, though, one of the things that a lot of people, I always want to be clear, there's no way that a Final Fantasy XI game, the way that it was in classic server era, would be able to have the mass market appeal that a game like Final Fantasy XIV requires.
What's the definition of mass market appeal? Because Final Fantasy XI wasn't that big then. Isn't RuneScape? It's number 13 out of 137 MMOs. In 2022, it is approaching levels that put it on par with 2013. Not to mention, Wrath of the Lich King Classic. So I don't know what his definition of mass market appeal is, because like I already fundamentally disagree with that. Because relative to other MMOs, like I would say number 13 is pretty freaking good. Pretty freaking good. Considering I don't think Final Fantasy XI was above that. Maybe it was just through there weren't that many MMOs then, but like MMOs is already a niche portion of gaming. So within MMOs, if you are commercially successful, you're doing great. You're doing great. So I do think there are grindy games like that. Absolutely I do. But he doesn't play any of those. Like, he doesn't play RuneScape. He doesn't play WoW Classic. He has an 11 account, but I don't know how much time he spends on that.
But like when people sit here and talk about WoW, and it's like, yeah, like being popular doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing. Like, at least for some of us, right? Yes, WoW had way more numbers. WoW defined the language. WoW disrupted the MMOs. It made it accessible to more people in an era where there wasn't that much online gaming. But now what the hell is an MMO and even to begin with in the first place? People like companies, because of trying to keep people subscribed and engaged, have really burned the dopamine, have really just overextended. And so like stepping into something like New World and having like not sitting here being thrown with daily login bonuses and all these chores that you have to do just so you can finally get to the thing that you want to do. Like, no, it's effing organic, and it just feels fun and a fun place to exist in.
New World absolutely burns the dopamine. So New World does a thing called Twitch drops. Obviously being owned by Amazon, Twitch being owned by Amazon. You can go watch the game and get excited about the game. They pair this with fresh start servers. They pair this with expanded zones, new content launches, and then they pair this with all sorts of events. The dopamine hits are still here. This is a heavily marketed game. New World is probably one of the largest marketing campaigns as far as just relentless, constant marketing I have seen outside of the mobile gaming space. It's drops. There is absolutely a dopamine hit in this game. And there will continue to be more drops.
Final Fantasy XIV did a decent job because they kind of gave you the dailies and then they let you finish them. Like there was an end point that you could do, but it's still that arbitrary mechanic. And I would argue over dailies, that's where player-driven economies really benefit, because if you want to go do something, go do something. And if you want to take advantage of it for yourself, you do, or you add that value to the market, right? We're all kind of participating in this bigger thing that none of us can do on our own. It's a global thing that we're all working towards on these goals. And that's something I think really special, really interesting. And it's such a cool thing to be a part of, and economics does that.
What about everything you just said matters for the difference between New World and any other MMO? As far as player economy, a player-driven economy does not encourage the balance he's talking about. The lack of retention, first of all, retention absolutely exists. There are these boards that refresh every certain number of hours. Like, there is that. But let's just assume for a moment what he's arguing is the player economy elements of New World. Once we acknowledge that all MMOs have retention mechanics, it just varies how many of them they have and how relevant they are to current in-game. Player-driven economy, he argues, allows you to take breaks. That's just not true. If you want to stay relevant in a player-driven economy, the person who is more actively involved in the market board, the person who is more actively involved in acquiring items, whether they are doing it with capital or they are actually out in the process of doing those, will make more. There is nothing about a player-driven economy that encourages people to take breaks. The most player-driven economy I have ever played is EVE Online. Now, he may choose not to care about that, but in that case, why does he need a player-driven economy? If your argument is, well, then I just don't care, then it doesn't matter. If you're just going to disengage the moment that it puts something negative on you, it doesn't matter. So if your argument is that something matters, then it should be something that all players feel that they benefit from engaging in, and player-driven economies benefit the person who puts in the most time.
But why can't you craft the gear? And it's also tied into Final Fantasy XIV's gearing system being a stat stack. People keep saying like, oh, people buy the ultimates clears in Final Fantasy XIV. Like, that's the reality. Like, I know people who have literally paid money, done this, and gone forward. The gear in and of itself, just being a stat stack, just having that power behind it, and having only one real avenue, and then everything else being a time-gated avenue. Why can't crafters and gatherers be a part of that system?
So, I understand his argument to be that because some very small percentage off-platform exchanges in-game or out-of-game resources for somebody else to play their account or for them to be carried through something, though ultimates are really hard to carry, so odds are it's somebody playing their account, that now ultimate is devalued. I do think that's a very small percentage, so I think that's a bit of a fringe answer. I think you're kind of straw-manning that. But his argument is that crafters and gatherers need to be able to impact the end game from a very low level. And so players should be able to engage in the true end game from a very low level. The reason that can happen in New World is because it's new. So in Classic, or in Vanilla, you could find items at level 10, level 20, level 30, level 40 that had value to max level characters because you were still in the same expansion. So to give New World credit for this implies that he should always play games that are in their first expansion. Because what'll happen is all the stuff from the last expansion will lose value. So a lot of what he's arguing here is that is comparing what happens after a game ages. He's comparing about what happened. It has nothing to do with Final Fantasy XIV. It has nothing to do with World of Warcraft. It has to do with what happens when a game ages. Specifically games that have a vertical progression system. So he's talking about it like it's a player, like it's an economy issue, that there is something that is economically different about New World versus Final Fantasy. But a lot of what he's arguing as far as how New World's doing it aren't really the elements of what I think New World is doing better economically. He's arguing that crafters are relevant, and the reason crafters are relevant has a lot to do, and gathering being relevant, that everything you do provides value. And that's because we're not at a point where there's things that are generated in New World that people don't still need. There will be a lot of item IDs that New World has that will fall by the wayside once the game has been running longer than a year. And the fact that he says crafters aren't able to craft raid relevant stuff at all is just a lack of understanding how the gearing system works within raiding, because he doesn't engage in it. Because Mr. Appy and Fiat have talked about, like, when they go on their alts, they go do it in crafted gear. The current Savage tier is clearable entirely with potions, food, gear, and materia melds that are all acquired from crafters and gatherers. If you are doing your weekly hunts for materia, or you just go buy it off the market board and you use your crafters and gatherers to gather up all the resources and then meld all that gear, you can clear all current Savage content in Final Fantasy XIV. All of it. They're not the best, but if you're not using a DPS meter and you're getting clears, who cares? And since DPS meters are against the rules, who cares? I disagree with his stance on the point, but I also disagree with his reasoning, and they're two different things. I think his reasoning is completely independent. His reasoning is that crafting is not relevant in endgame. And he prefers player-driven economies. And I don't think crafting being relevant in endgame is what dictates whether or not something is a player-driven economy.
Players should be an opportunity. They should not be a cost. And that's what the raid mindset builds in. It frustrates the crap out of me because, like, I'm all for people having raids. I'm all for even having trophies behind that clear to showcase your talent. But when they also then lock the power behind that, especially because there aren't any perks, there's no real other thing. The gears are just now these glamour pieces. It is, in my mind, a very frustrating system to be a part of.
Okay. So now we've moved outside of economy. So he pointed out in an earlier thing that word choice matters. He's using the word economy very, very broadly. He's now using economy to encompass everything in the game where you now are dealing with player interaction. And does something one player does improve or hurt another player's progress? So now this becomes an argument for or against, should MMORPGs have solo elements that are not impacted by or impact others? Not should they have solo things you can do. He said asynchronous was fine, but what that means is when you gather something, does that impact other people? In Final Fantasy XIV, it does not. Your MSQ progress does not impact other people. Unless you are directly interacting, you are in their group, you are chatting with them, there is nothing in Final Fantasy XIV that dictates somebody else. And they are getting further away from that than closer. They only happen when you choose to. Optional exploratory zones, optional community content such as maps, hunts. There are plenty of ways to find player interaction, but none of it happens by force. New World, however, is the opposite. New World, everything you do matters. When you are doing quests, whether it is going off and fishing by yourself, chopping down logs by yourself, PvPing, running dungeons with groups, it affects faction standings, it affects things like that, and so you are helping either build or tear down a portion of the map being controlled by what Final Fantasy would call a grand company, that ultimately many of the choices you make will dictate the amount of progress that other people are experiencing. So it is a huge amount of player interaction. And so somebody trying to complete a quest, it benefits you that they complete that quest, whether or not you participate. It benefits you. Unless it's PvP, in which case you guys fighting each other benefits someone. Because now we're talking about PvP, which fosters a certain level of interaction. The pros of that is that now every time you see somebody in the game doing something, it feels good because we were working towards a common goal. Final Fantasy does not foster a lot of that. It's something that New World seems to be doing more and more of, and Final Fantasy seems to be doing less and less of. The downside of that is that in Final Fantasy XIV, right now, player subscriptions are up, the game's doing great, the fiscal reports look awesome, but if it ever wasn't, Final Fantasy XIV would never really have to die. As long as they keep the servers online, it would maintain itself as a valid playable experience. New World, on the other hand, has these massive surges of players, and they spin up all these new servers to help minimize queues, and people hop in, and when those people lose interest, they now have to go through server merges. Because while you have allowed player interaction to be meaningful, you have by its very nature made the most perfect, the most optimal, the preferred method of play is where player interaction is happening. Playing on a server where nobody else is helping progressing cities, where nobody else is doing quests, where nobody else is ever out in the world with you, is not how New World thrives. And so now you have to deal with server merges. You have to find a way. There is a minimum viable number of active players that are on at any given time and are on in any given month, week, or year that are mandatory for the server's natural systems to feel good. But ultimately, player interaction is a big thing. But I don't think that is economic driven. I don't think a game has to have a good or bad economy in the ability to trade items, the ability to buy and sell things for a currency. You could have a barter system like Diablo 2 did. You could have a market board system like EVE Online functions from. I don't think anything that is traditionally considered economic is affected by that. I think player interaction is wildly separate, and a game can have or not have that, and it can have an economy or not have an economy.
Then it doesn't really matter. You have the ability to do a player economy. We're talking about two distinct ideas. It's unfortunate that Zeppela does not know the difference in that regards. I think it would be a much more interesting back and forth right here to kind of get that perspective from her in the long run. Maybe we'll get her on the podcast and kind of talk it out, because Chris also comes from WoW. Like, when it comes down to it, everybody that I've been hearing feedback in it, it's just maybe not their kind of either the tea if they've experienced it, or, and she has. I think she's played Guild Wars 2.
Sometimes WoW, from a person who doesn't like WoW and has been in the MMORPG space in a long time, sometimes WoW becomes this disease that I've been tainted with, and it's now chronic, and I can't beat it, and it's non-curable, and so everything that comes out of my mouth can be dismissed because I played WoW. When we're talking about player interaction, we're talking about economies in New World versus Final Fantasy XIV. WoW doesn't matter. WoW doesn't matter. Nothing I'm talking about today does WoW matter. We can use it as a data point. We could not use it as a data point. WoW is not the driving force. I have played Final Fantasy XIV since A Realm Reborn. I played New World on launch, and I've been playing it off and on since. World of Warcraft has no direct bearing on what we're talking about here. When you're talking about player interactions, when you're talking about economy, I could leave WoW out as an example from the rest of this video, and it doesn't become what's shaping my mind. That's not the driving force. But there is this idea of, like, when he says unfortunate, that's a little bit dismissive. Like, oh, it's unfortunate that you're just too tainted by your past. Like, it's unfortunate. Like, it's something my friends and I would joke about with what college we went to, because we went to rival colleges. So it'd be like, oh, well, it's unfortunate that since you're an Aggie, you're just too stupid to know better. Like, that's a funny thing to say to a friend. It's incredibly dismissive to say in this context. It has no bearing here. And to say that some game he didn't like somehow makes his opinion more valid, I find really dismissive. I don't think he meant it that way. Brian's a lot warmer and more empathetic of a person than I am. He's a lot kinder than I am. So I don't think he meant it that way, but it comes across as really smug and dismissive. Especially because, like, I don't think of Zeppela as a WoW player anymore. Right? This isn't somebody who just came over. She is a Final Fantasy creator. She is aware of WoW, but she is a Final Fantasy creator. Just like Brian's not a Final Fantasy 11 player. I don't care if he has a current sub or not. Like, that's not the majority of what people know him for.
In a matchmaking-based game, the meta ends up becoming even more powerful. But here's the thing. If we got in a group of 4 people...
Okay. In a matchmaking, the meta becomes driving. Only to the degree that the devs say it should. So the duty finder system, the one that opts us in, does not dictate the meta. Because all it does is it says, this content is clearable by, for example, in Final Fantasy XIV, 1 tank, 1 healer, 2 DPS. Period. The devs have put the bare minimum requirements, and some of those requirements really aren't that restrictive at all. They don't align you with anything that is that traditional definition of player-dictated meta. It just doesn't. There is no meta in the matchmaking system. The matchmaking system is not what dictates meta. So I fundamentally disagree with his opening point of this section, because that's not where meta comes from. Where meta comes from is that players have a limited amount of time and energy to put into a video game, and very few players enjoy failing. But a lot of people play video games and want to have some success. And so they dictate what the methods are that have been successful in the past. So they build the mountain and they say, here is the most successful thing, here are some less successful things, here are some less successful things, and here is the garbage. And you get to decide how high up that you want to climb. And so in a manual matchmaking system, the player base as a whole gets to decide how high up the mountain you need to be to find a group. And they get to decide if something is possible. The player-driven meta is what causes players to be excluded from things based on playing in a particular mindset. Versus playing with a particular build, playing with too low of a gear score, playing without having watched guides, playing without all their abilities on the bar. Whatever they do, the players are the ones that decide the minimum efficiency to be allowed in a group.
The fact that the raid, like they make this pinnacle thing, and then it completely changes the culture around the game itself, right? If you want to raid, great. Here's the thing, though. This ties right back into the player-driven economy. You go raid, you get your loot, and then you go take a break or whatever, right? Like, it's this...
No. You did not acquire the best in slot gear in a player-driven economy to then log out. If he wants to talk about a raid mindset, you acquired the best in slot gear to be able to do the best in slot stuff. So he talks about, if I had the best in slot gear, I'd be able to better open world farm. So you want to keep going. There is also an idea that typically raiders do not just raid because of the gear. Typically, people will not struggle through something for the gear. Ultimate is a great example of this. There are a lot of people that clear Ultimates, do not equip that title, do not care for that glamour. They clear it to clear it. It is an intrinsic fun for them. Intrinsic, internal, as opposed to an extrinsic, external fun. I am not doing it for the loot. I do want the loot. I don't want to not do it. But I am doing it because I like it. And so they're going to go back and they're going to clear that content again. So he has this idea of, I don't know why I'd work so hard to clear it and then just take a break. The people who are working so hard to clear it oftentimes don't just take a break. There are some that do. I'm one that just clears it once and that's good for me. I just wanted to taste it. Thank you very much. You know, all of the different people that have been in my various kind of savage clears and stuff, a lot of those people who have cleared the raids, there are people in our community that come in and help me through savage, and they're not going to get loot. If we get a clear tonight, they will not receive loot, or they don't want to receive loot. They're just here because it's fun.
I think essentially what happens is you get more and more people into that mindset. It's just like, why? Why would you spend that time beating your head against the wall when in 8 weeks it's just gonna get replaced?
Because it's fun. Because it's fun. The same reason you would grind up gold in a game. Like, we play games for fun. That's why. That's the reason.
When, now here, like 8 months, it's just gonna get replaced.
Yep.
So why not give multiple pathways? Like, it's all like catching hopefully a theme of player choice.
There is multiple pathways. This has been one of the frustrations with Brian, and I tried to sum it up in a video, and like, as somebody who doesn't chase perfect BIS, I don't always get it exactly right, because it's not something I directly interact with, but I am aware of it, right? It's just beyond me.
I can go engage in the economy. I can still get on the same power scale, and I can have completely different perks that, guess what, appeal to me, and perhaps enhance my group's experience. We have our own meta. We have our own BIS. We have our own...
That's not how BIS is calculated. He's talking about BIS like it's an opinion. And I do think that, like, if BIS is a mountain that you climb, and the closer to it there is one peak, and if you say, well, I'm not willing to do what it takes to get to the peak, I'm gonna go to here, and that's where I'm gonna stop, right? I'm gonna get to this base camp here, and I'm gonna stop. That's fine, but it's not BIS. So BIS actually is determined by math, and it is literally the best theoretical, most optimal amount of damage that can come out of your class. The community-driven BIS is it's not something we vote on. It's not democratic. It's not like a big cult mindset. It's just math. It can be determined by a spreadsheet, totally on your own in your basement. Like, it doesn't... BIS in an MMORPG is based on the most optimal outcome. It has nothing to do with my BIS versus your BIS. BIS is BIS. It's best in slot.
That's what I feel like I get in New World. I get the choice. I can go farm all these different options.
I look forward to getting into a New World, man. I look forward to it. Because I think some of the things he's calling for, my assumption is that they exist in New World. And maybe that's just pessimism. Maybe it's just somebody that's played a lot of MMOs. But I assume that if you get to the absolute peak, tip-top portion of Brimstone, that there's a meta. I assume there are weapon combos that people just ask why you're wearing that. I assume there is an optimal gear rating between light, medium, and heavy. I assume that in PvP, people want you playing a certain way. Certain weapons are considered trash. I just naturally assume there's a meta. And therefore, there's a BIS. There might be multiple things at that level that are lateral, but there is a best. And anything that is not in that category is inherently worse. These 5 items are BIS. Everything else is worse to varying degrees. I cannot imagine a game where there are multiple ways to play, and those play all dictate different amounts of outgoing damage where something is not seen as best.
People trying to, like, gatekeep. They're like, this guy's not even in all 625s. Who gives a shit? Who?
Oh, so there is a meta. Okay, never mind. He answered it. You guys in chat have been saying it, but he answered it. He's not truly getting BIS from avoiding top-end content in New World. He's just allowing his definition of BIS to be a larger portion of what he's dictating than in 14. In 14, he sees the item level, he knows it's worse, he admits it's worse, and it frustrates him. And in New World, he sees the gear score and says gear score doesn't matter, therefore I'm BIS, because BIS is an opinion. BIS is not an opinion.
That in and of itself is something, especially in modern MMOs with hundreds of guides, etc. Like, it's just a function of scheduling. Do you want to schedule a raid tonight? Do you want to keep working on that? I don't find and haven't found the raids to be the difficulty barrier that they have now. I haven't done Ultimate, and I know that that's going to be like, that would be like a real challenge.
That's his core difference, is that he hasn't done even like a true taste of raiding. He's gone in and cleared up, and so because he doesn't surround himself by this, he can be very dismissive of it. And that's one of the big frustrations with him, right? And so, like, if you haven't done it and you're respectful of it, that's fine. But if you're going to be dismissive, he argues with Zepla that she should have to play New World with an open mind before she's allowed to criticize. And yet he's willing to criticize the reasons raiding works the way it does, but refuses to do the same thing.
But
he didn't clear the full tier. He cleared the first 2 fights of 1 tier 1 time. Hunt, Trains, Fates, and Gathering. Just to put a brief aside on what Zepla's saying here, Hunt, Trains, Fates, and Gathering are 3 pieces of content Brian does not do. He caps his gatherers and he's done. So if he does that via leave quest or something, you could do that in a single day. You could cap Fisher without ever leaving town. Fates, Brian doesn't really see the reason to do. The bicolor gemstones got him really excited when it was added, but I do not believe he's capped all the zones in Endwalker, so I don't believe he's interacted with, like, let's go get that mount, and let's talk about what Blue Mage means within these things. And when a relic goes into a fate step, let's assume the Endwalker one goes into a fate step, that's not going to mean anything to Brian because the relic is not best in slot until the end of expansion. Even though it is really freaking good, it doesn't matter. It's not BIS. And then the last one is hunts. Brian doesn't cap tomes. I haven't really capped tomes since Heavensward until patch 6.2. I decided I wanted to try this out, and it's drastically changed my opinion of Final Fantasy XIV. I'd probably feel differently if I kept capping tomes the entire time since then, but as somebody who's just now recently started capping tomes again, I'm finding hunts really, really fun. It's fun to be around that many players. It does feel like the open world is alive, so that's why she names it. But those are 3 examples of things that simply do not impact Brian. So she can say those things, and, like, that can literally just blow by either of his 2 facial expressions there. They don't matter. And he's not alone in that. There are a lot of people that do not cap fates. There are a lot of people that don't craft or gather. There are a lot of people that don't do tribal quests or side quests in a zone. There are a lot of people that don't go back and do things like sightseeing logs. There are a lot of people that do not cap their tomes every week, and if they do it through another source. They go run maps, they go run PvP, they do expert roulettes, and so they don't use the open world on something like hunt trains because they got everything they want from sacks of nuts and they're done.
About how fantastic Guild Wars 2 is because I feel like I do that every single day. But like other games could definitely it wouldn't hurt to take a few pages from Guild Wars 2.
They can't.
Guild Wars the 2.
Sure they can.
And it looks like
they can't. What do you mean they can't? Yoshi P told Brian and I to our face that they cannot build a trust style system for ARR dungeons. He said it was impossible. It is impossible, and people now do it every day. They absolutely can. Bozja Zadnor reinvented what a fate meant, and Mr. Happy said, could we do that in the open world? And Yoshi P said it is impossible. But I guarantee we could absolutely get there. We could absolutely get there. What he means is it would take a lot of time. We absolutely can build a more intriguing open world. The Bicolor Gemstone Edition was a massive upgrade to Fates. The removal of Battle Class Leaves drastically changed the way we interact with the open world. Side quests moving to being something that can level sync so that they remain relevant, no matter what level you want to enter that zone, was a massive change to the way that we go through the open world on alts. We can absolutely make it function to the degree that Guild Wars does. Guild Wars zones have vistas, which is the sightseeing log. They have exploration through points of interest, which is the aether currents. They have waypoints, which are aetherites that we have to attune to. They have a story through that zone, which is a story through that zone. They have side quests and repeatable side quests in that zone, which are side quests and tribal quests. They have rare spawn events, which are fates. All of these things in Guild Wars 2 can exist. Guild Wars 2 just does them deeper and wider and in a larger quantity that is more relevant in more ways. So when you take something like the hunt system and you make it a brilliant source of current in-game tomes, current non-cappable tomes, and a new currency, people go do hunts. And they have a lot of fun doing it. There's vibe trains, there's bullet trains, they have a blast. When Blue Mage got added, people went out in the world and tore the world up. They absolutely can. It is not, well, Guild Wars started in 2012, we're never gonna catch them now. Yes, you can. Final Fantasy, if they want to make the New World a priority, absolutely can. That is a choice, that is a priority. I'm not saying they should, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I am saying they can.
Even today, it's breathtaking.
For the FF11 open world.
Even today, I would say that the Final Fantasy XI open world is breathtaking for its time, right? Like, when playing New World, it's like how I imagine the 11 world could be if they had that.
Anybody have some nostalgia glasses we can put over him here? Anybody got some, do we need some rose glasses here that I can put on when people talk like this?
Kind of budget and technology,
Do we have
right?
that? Do we have that?
You know, for a PS2 game.
No.
I think 11 is still breathtaking to this day.
Why do you need BIS if you're not raising? You don't. It's just to feel good. You checked all.
And that's where, again, like, this is
Why do you need BIS if you're not rating? And she says, you don't. It's just to make you feel good.
a completely French and German kind of problem right now, because who cares? Who cares? Like, why is that an issue?
The raiders who like that they have unique rewards to reward them for engaging in their system. That's who cares. That's who cares. It is exactly the same as when people dismiss something that Brian says because it doesn't impact them. Who cares? The people on the opposite side. That's who cares. So that's the answer to that question.
If I want to go about and get BIS,
yep,
and I want to go, craft countless amounts of items for the community and the economy and sure, gather 1 trillion items, etc. Like, shouldn't that be my choice to do that?
Yep, sure.
I think that's where the economy, like,
and it is up to the point of crafted gear. The highest item level available from dungeons, which is the content that everybody has to clear whether they like it or not, is lower than crafted gear, and crafted gear has a unique property that it can receive more stat boosting materia than anything else. And crafted gear, full pentamelded, is capable of clearing all content currently released. Always. Every time there is content added to the game that is not clearable by the highest level of crafted gear, new crafted gear is added. So what he's calling for does exist. Crafted pentameld gear is incredibly powerful. Brian does not craft his own crafted pentameld gear. He does not meld his own pentamelded gear. He pays people for it. So it's not that he likes the act of crafting. It's not that he likes the act of melding. He wants the ability to trade his gil for the gear. He's just mad that there's a bonus level of gear that honestly doesn't even really matter to raiders that can clear it in crafted gear. And the tome gear acts as a soft nerf in making things just a little bit easier, but that is widely available to everybody. You can get tomes to grant the tome gear from doing anything endgame related. But I believe that in New World, if you give New World a few more years, and you let Brian approach the end of it, as he's already stated, when people start to tell him that he doesn't have the right stuff, and he goes, whatever, it's the same thing. He just may feel that that's a fringe minority, but as more and more people have level 60 characters with all their weapons capped and access to all of the current gear score loot, it will be the exact same thing. So what he's calling for is an intrinsic problem with MMORPG communities that have been around a while. It has nothing to do with the difference between New World and Final Fantasy XIV.
I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you just want to look cool. Who gives a shit? I don't care about glamour. I don't.
Yes, you do, because he has said before that ultimate weapons should be sellable. He absolutely wants trophies to not be locked away as well. So he's saying that here in this context because he doesn't care about glamour, but I have heard him say that New World weapons should be sellable.
Yeah, I don't care if their feelings are hurt. Why are their feelings hurt? They did the thing. And fact is, the reality, I from the people I've heard from and some of the interesting conversations I've had, people still go and spend real money and get that clear. I don't know how their feelings aren't hurt by that.
The focus on the 1% of people that are breaking terms of service just shouldn't have an effect on either side. Like arguing against, well, there's RMT in this game. There's RMT in every game. So like that is just not a good argument for either game. That makes no difference. Just take that all the way off. Who cares about the RMTers? That is something between the people doing the illicit activity and the people who are policing the illicit activity to deal with. It does not affect me because I don't do any of those things.
I'm not looking for a thing to do. I'm looking for a place to kind of relax. And that doesn't mean relaxing isn't hard content. I'm just looking for a place to, like, another place.
It does mean that. It does mean that. It does mean that. He is looking for a place to relax, not a thing to do. Means he is inherently not playing for BIS. So there are people playing New World the same way that the very people he does not like playing Final Fantasy play that. It absolutely, those are the same thing. Fishing 1 trillion times is not as hard as the hardest raid in the game. It may take as many hours. It may take more hours. But it is just objectively not difficult. It is about doing a simple task and doing it over and over and over and over. There's nothing hard.
So when it comes down to it, there is still personal BIS. That's something that I don't ever see and hear about.
No, it's not.
In other MMOs, but we hear about it in New
Because it's not real.
World. The devs have actually talked about it. Personal BIS. And that ties.
No, there is no such thing. The moment you say there's personal BIS in every game. Because now you are talking about, here is the content that is available to me, here are my objectives, here's my willingness to pursue the things that reward and loot, and I am going to reach the peak of what is available within my Venn diagram, and I'm going to stop. And you can do that in any game you want. You don't have to finish any game. You could start any single player RPG and you could go, how far can I get in 20 hours? And then you could delete the game. And that could be your personal best clear, your personal speed run. The moment you make something personal, it is totally an opinion. Totally an opinion, and it does not matter. There is no personal BIS in an MMORPG that replaces BIS as determined by the meta, because BIS is not an opinion, it's math. Just to be clear, Yoshi P also says you can clear all content as all classes. That's the same statement. You can clear it your way. That doesn't replace the fact that the community found BIS.
So I could have something that I personally enjoy more, and it makes me more effective, and I'm not subject to the meta because I'm not match-made into it. Matchmaking would make meta way more powerful in this game and would ruin it in my mind, because then you have to, there's a hefty cost. There's a hefty cost.
Matchmaking does not determine BIS because the devs want everybody to play their way. So they will set the minimum bar, and that will be the amount to get match made, and then they will penalize you from withdrawing from the matchmaking system. So you will be in with a random assortment at anybody that is above the bar that the devs set. The meta is determined by players and is substantially stricter than anything the devs put on the game, because the meta is looking at optimizing. Matchmaking does not drive meta.
That I hope that if New World, in year 2 or 3, like, they don't need to go to level 70, at least not now. They could wait 5 or 6 years and then say, hey, we're going to 70, because then that gives you 5 or 6 years of level 60 content, making the game bigger, not making the game taller. And then you can make the game a little bit taller, and then you can make it bigger. Taller?
Nope. The moment it adds level 70, it doesn't matter how long it's been. It could be 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. The moment you add 10 new levels to it, everything that is concurrently game matters less. Everything. Because he's explaining it as somebody that's been playing since beta and has been experiencing that whole 5 years. But somebody who downloads Final Fantasy XIV today, nothing prior to Endwalker truly matters. It matters if they say it matters, but as far as BIS, as far as this conversation, it doesn't matter. You need to be level 90 in the current raids gear. As a matter of fact, when we go into 6.2 raids, the 6.0 raids don't matter. And when the 6.4 raids get here, the 6.2 raids don't matter. Nothing matters for BIS but what is best. The moment there is verticality added to New World, everything below that new point doesn't matter. There is no, we're going to balance lateral by having a lot of lateral and then vertical. The moment there is vertical, that is all that matters.
It's such a huge cost. We lose player agency. We lose player-driven choice. We lose difficult, challenging
But there are people that love it. There are people that love it.
Content. Party finders, yes. Matchmaking, absolutely not.
No guarantee.
With the exception of PvP. Nobody gives a...
Nope. That's exactly the same. Matchmaking in PvP versus party finders in PvP do all the same things. As a matter of fact, that's why we can't have party finders in PvP, because PvP you actually get to hurt somebody else's experience as opposed to PvP you don't. And so if you allow for party finders to go in and have pre-made teams on ranked Crystalline Conflict, it will remove the ability to be in Crystalline Conflict as a non-team person. So actually it's exactly the opposite. So like matchmaking is the same across all content. It allows people to get into content quicker in trade for not getting to choose who you go with. He's saying he doesn't care, right? Just who cares? Let people go. Who cares is people who care about PvP. And there are people who take PvP very, very, very seriously. And to those people, they do care. Brian and I don't typically care about PvP in MMORPGs, so we don't mind matchmaking because we don't mind if we win or lose. But to people that do mind, that's incredibly hurtful.
Why?
He doesn't actually like grinding either. He didn't cap in Eureka. He didn't like following that through. He doesn't cap bicolored gemstones. He doesn't cap his tomes every week. Brian doesn't, I don't even believe he caps all of his tribal quests. He doesn't have a lot of the grindy achievements in game. So Brian doesn't like grinding, Brian doesn't like crafting, and Brian doesn't like raiding. So just to expound on our point, all of those things within Final Fantasy XIV, based on the evidence of his actions, do not appeal to Brian. This here, Brian likes seeing the bars fill, and after the bar fills, he moves on to another bar. If it weren't for the controller guides, a lot of classes that he capped, he would never touch again. So he fills these bars, and then he's done. And so once he fills bars, that's it. And so he logs in for the purpose of grinding completion.
This is kind of this culture, right? Like, they've been trained on WoW. 14 adopted that. So it's like, you kind of get trained, and this is essentially like, oh, this is what we all do. And it's like, well,
14 is way different than WoW, by the way. 14 is way different than WoW.
Are other ways of going about it. And then it's like
as much as it had a similar origin point, the things we've talked about today, when we talk about BIS, when we talk about retention mechanics, when we talk about the highest end content, when we talk about the number of things you can do within game and the number of ways that there are player interactions and how those are fostered through both matchmaking and party finder, he is literally talking about all of the areas minus story where Final Fantasy distinguishes itself from World of Warcraft. They have a lot in common, but the subjects he's talked about today are many of the areas where Final Fantasy is most distinct from World of Warcraft.
And he can make money, and he can gear himself up, and he can do these things. And guess what? Because you have perks and you have BIS fishing stuff. Everybody thinks BIS about the raid. F the raid.
What?
Fishes, and he challenges himself to the most ludicrous fishing. He's in a race on how he can get his fishing expertise, which there's not a cap on. Awesome. And he can make money, and he can gear himself up, and he can do these things. And guess what? Because you have perks and you have BIS fishing stuff. Everybody thinks BIS about the raid. F the raid. F that culture. Player choice. You want to raid? Raid. You want to supply the raiders? Supply the raiders. You want to go have some kind of passive asynchronous multiplayer stuff? Great. There's so many really good ideas in MMOs, and we haven't seen anybody taking the risks. I feel like New World takes those risks. And I'm hoping Ashes succeeds in its risk as well. BIS in a fish, baby. Let's freaking go.
And the comparison being made between 14 and New World, like how they were really and truly very distinct.
Be better, Brian, man. You're one of my closest, longest, oldest friends. Be better. Be better. Be better. Like I don't know if he's done any of these, but there is a whole system in any MMO. JoshStrifeHayes had a whole video about why fishing is required, where you go in here, you go down to fishing, and you look at this. These are all the things you can do within fishing, and there's an entire system around going and collecting high quality fish, and then going and catching the big fish. Big fish are a real pain, man. They really are. And I can hop over here onto my fisher, where my fisher has its own abilities. I have gear. I pentameld that gear, and I chase that, and I can craft it. My entire inventory is clogged right now because I need to update myself to the new BIS, which I'm going to do via crafting instead of engaging in the quest style system, because I don't want the script gear. I want to craft my own gear, and crafting is relevant. All the things he's talking about, everything he's talking about exists. You don't want to play this game, that's fine. But if you're going to use examples of the reason that New World is different than Final Fantasy XIV, please, for the love of God, make sure that they are different than Final Fantasy XIV.